Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So this is my roundup of the books that I've read in 2023 and I've done quite well this year with 41 books, which is a big increase on last year's 16, and I think the previous year was maybe 10. So I definitely had a long period because of COVID and lockdown and having a baby where I just didn't read a book for like a year and a half, and so it took me a while to like get back into it. But now I'm like quite into reading and I've been enjoying it. It's been quite a mixed bag of books that I've read. I've been trying to read some new and different things. I was trying to go through the books on my shelf that I've just been hanging around for ages that I just not got round to reading for whatever reason. And then also just trying to try some different things that I'd seen on booktubers YouTube videos, and again it's just a mixed bag. I was hoping that like if someone recommends you a good book, all their recommendations would be good, but it doesn't really work out that way because it's very subjective, isn't it? So I thought I would just whiz through quickly the 41 books that I've read this year, and then go on to some of the ones that I particularly liked and then some of the ones that I've particularly not liked. I did just have to change my battery then, so I don't know if everything kind of moved ever so slightly. But yeah, whizzing through my list on Storygraph, which is the app that I've been using just to track the books, in no particular order because it seems like these are a bit randomly ordered for some reason. But there is The Tennis Party by Madeline Wickham or Sophie Kinsella. So I didn't realise Sophie Kinsella was a pen name. Anyway, Assembly by Natasha Brown, Pigeon Pie by Nancy Mitford, The Blessing by Nancy Mitford, How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen by Julia King and Joanna Faber, The Female Man by Joanna Russ, Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, Lady Susan by Jane Austen, The Confession by Jessie Burton, Why We Eat Too Much by Andrew Jenkinson, The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy, Brown Girls by Daphne, Palasi, Andreades, sorry. The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Andreades. Again, I'm sorry, that's probably pronounced wrong. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker, The Wife by Meg Wolitzer, Motherhood by Sheila Heti, The Parenting Map by Shafali Sabari. Everyone calls her Dr. Shafali, so I've not really heard her surname. Outrage by Ashley Dottie Charles, No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, The Garden of Evening Mists by Twan Eng, Three Men in New Suits by J.B. Priestley, Reputation by Lex Croucher, After You'd Gone by Maggie O'Farrell, The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. I'm sorry, I'm sure I've heard his name pronounced, but I've just completely forgotten how to say it. The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams, Because I Said So by Sarah Ockwell Smith. That is a kind of parenting kind of book. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, Science Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Harara, Gone by Min Kim, The Three Dahlias by Katie Watson, Piranesi by Susannah Clarke, Dreamtime by Venetia Welby, The Monogram Murders, which is a Hercule Poirot book who was created by Agatha Christie, but it's Sophie Hannah has written the book. And then similarly, Marple 12 New Mysteries. Originally Marple was written by Agatha Christie, but these are 12 different authors. Behind the Scenes at the Museum by Kate Atkinson, The Christmas Murder Game by Alexandra Benedict, The Long Shadow by Celia Fremlin, and Murder on the Christmas Express, also by Alexandra Benedict. So those are all the books that I've read by mid-December. There is still technically a couple more weeks of the year, so I could potentially read another book or two if I went for it. But just so that this gets filmed, those are the books that I've read this year. Okay, so I thought I would just run through a few that I liked, a few that I didn't like. I was going to do 5 of each, but then I just kept finding more that I liked, so I guess it was quite a good year in that sense. I'll start with the ones that I didn't like so much, and then we can end on a positive. It's a bit of a mixed bag really of like types and reasons why I didn't like it. So I will start with The Female Man by Joanna Russ. This book is just so confusing. It's sci-fi and it was written in the 70s, maybe the 60s actually, published in the 70s. And it's about 4 different women that all have very similar names, just to add to the confusion, that live in like 4 slightly different worlds. So one of them is very much like our world, although it was written in the late 60s, early 70s, so like the world then. Another woman, the Second World War never happened and the Great Depression is going on. It's our world, but they live in New York. And then there's another woman who lives on like a planet called While Away, and there only women exist, there are no men, and they've learned how to reproduce with just women. So they've lived like that for a very long time. She is particularly unpleasant. Like, I don't really know what we're supposed to get from this, but she's just a weird. She's just a weird character. I don't know. It's just like it was very confusing. There is also another character who it turns out I think is like the narrator is essentially that character, but it gets really purposefully. You never really know who you're talking about or what's happening, and I just didn't know what I was supposed to make out of it. I think it's supposed to be like a feminist something or other, but like honestly, it was just confusing. Something a bit different, but still kind of feminist vibes, I guess. It's called Reputation by Lex Croucher. So on the cover it says if Bridgerton and Fleabag had a book baby, and it's a truth universally acknowledged that girls just want to have fun. And then inside the acknowledgements, well, it says, for Jane Austen, sorry Jane. And I agree. Okay, this is not Jane Austen. First of all, like, it's a lot chunkier than Austen. Austen managed to write much better, more interesting books in half the number of pages. I'm sorry, I'm feeling a bit bitchy, I think. But, so it's called Reputation. It's about a young woman who's lived a fairly sheltered life, who's now been kind of sent away by her parents, who want to just kind of like have fun without her, I guess. And so she's been a bit abandoned and feels that way, to live with her aunt, I think. But they're also a bit boring. So then she meets the you know, sexy and fun Frances Campbell, who is also a woman of colour. And so that kind of, at the back of the book, the author just talk about how it's the authenticity of having characters of colour, and so fair enough. But I don't know if the rest of the book really felt like it was entirely authentic. So it's supposed to be set in like the Regency period, which was when Jane Austen was writing, I guess, as you can see from their nice outfits. Anyway, so Frances is just quite unpleasant. I don't know what the appeal was. Like, she just gets drunk a lot, they take a lot of drugs, she lounges around in not very much clothing, like inappropriate dress. I don't know. I guess the point is supposed to be that she's exciting and her friends are more exciting and interesting. They just seem quite unpleasant. And it's also that the main character, Georgiana, is supposed to be quite sheltered, and so she's shocked by Frances's wild behaviour, but then similarly gets drunk and takes loads of drugs with her at the same time, and it's just like a bit of an odd, I don't know, she seems to just go along with it quite easily. And then so it's called Reputation because obviously a woman's reputation was more easily damaged than a man's, and that comes up quite a bit. I don't know, it just didn't, it just didn't work for me. It wasn't authentic enough, period. You know, the period didn't seem authentic enough to really work. But then I just didn't care. This one, The Confession by Jessie Burton. So I read The Miniaturist, which was her debut book that got a lot of attention. I read The Muse, which came after it, and then The Confession came after that. I know she has also written a sequel to The Miniaturist, so I'm not quite sure where that came. I think it was after this one though. the 3 books I read of hers, I really liked The Miniaturist, I quite liked The Muse, I didn't like this one. They're just getting worse. I think part of the problem is, like, The Miniaturist is set in Amsterdam. I can't remember what century it's set in now, like the 1700s or something, but it feels very like there was a lot of research on the time period. It feels like a period book, and you kind of feel like you're moving into a different world. The Muse was set partially in the 1960s in London, and then also there's like flashbacks to probably the 1930s in, I want to say, Spain. So my memory is absolutely terrible these days. But anyway, you really felt like those 2 time periods and countries were quite different. And I mean, also, like, it's pre-World War II and post-World War II, so it's quite a big, you know, event and change has happened. In The Confession, it's set in more contemporary London, and then also like the 1980s in LA for chunks of the book. And there just didn't seem to be much difference. I don't know, I just wasn't getting any, like, the period didn't really seem to work in the same way. And I also thought the fact it's called The Confession, but there isn't really much of a confession, because you kind of figure it out what happened, and like the woman that it's just, the woman seems like a horrible person. I don't know. I don't want to give too much away, but I don't recommend it. The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. So a couple going to Helsinki for him to receive a very prestigious literary prize because he is an author, but she decides on the plane going out there that she's going to leave him, and then it kind of flashes back to how they met and their relationship and stuff, and so you discover why she wants to leave him. It's incredibly obvious, I felt, why she would, like, the big secret, the big reveal seemed very obvious, but what I couldn't fathom was why she got together with him in the first place. This is non-fiction. It's called Motherhood by Sheila Heti, and it's about a woman, Sheila Heti, trying to decide if she wants to have children and going back and forth. I just didn't care if she had children or not. Like, I know it's a big question for a person to ask themselves, but like, I don't personally care, and I didn't really get anything from her writing as to how you would make that decision. She has like this really irritating thing where she is flipping coins to make decisions, and it just said at the beginning that she actually was flipping coins to make the decisions, and also then she's asking like some really odd like questions that I just didn't, I don't know. This one seems a bit harsh. So it's The Christmas Murder Game by Alexandra Benedict. It's not the best book ever, but it's fine. It's a Christmas murder mystery, but it involves like a game where a young woman has to return back to the house where she grew up, which she hasn't been back to since her mother died, and is a kind of a game, like a puzzle game, to determine who's going to inherit the house now that the current recent owner has passed away as well. And it just seems a bit silly, but then obviously like a bunch of people get murdered. Like, it is a bit of a bloodbath by the end. I just found the writing style really irritating. Like, the author used so many similes where things are like something else. There was one in her other book where she said that someone's eyes were like the aurora borealis or something, but it's like you would have had about 3 of them on every page, and it just got really irritating. Everything was like something, but also very dramatic. So like the rain falling down was like the, I don't know, pain she felt in her soul. I don't know. It was just really irritating. The Murder on the Christmas Express, which is the last book that I've read, was also by her. I didn't realise when I bought it that they were the same author, because that would have actually put me off. It's a much better written book. Like, someone has told her to cut all those similes out, and it's much better. I still don't think it's the best book I've ever read. It was still slightly irritating, but it was a much less irritating read. And then The Blessing by Nancy Mitford. I quite like Nancy Mitford. I've read a couple of her books. I just hated this book mainly because one of the characters is so unpleasant. So a young woman in the middle of World War II marries a man she barely knows, and he goes away to fight in World War II. She has a baby and she raises the child for several years until he comes back, and he's just horrible. And this was a book, like, it's not very long at all. It's 200 and something, 217 pages or something. I just stopped halfway through and just couldn't keep going with it, and I just didn't read a book then for about 2 months. I had to force myself to finish it because I don't like not finishing books, but then I just stopped reading. I just hated it. Anyway, so those are the books that I didn't really like this year, but I do have several that I did like, and this video is going to be 4 hours long, so I'm trying to try and speed up. So this is quite a recent one called The Long Shadow by Celia Fremlin. I liked the cover, that's what really attracted me to it. Always the cover, it's only ever the cover. And then it also says Welcome to the Nightmare Christmas Holiday, which for a while I did think was the title, but it's not. And they've obviously, so this book was published in the 70s, but I suspect it was actually written in the 50s. I'm not 100% sure, because a bunch of her other books, like they've obviously that's going to be really fuzzy, isn't it? This one here is called Uncle Paul, but it says at the bottom, Welcome to the Nightmare Summer Holiday, and it has very similar kind of style with like the blood splatters. So they've obviously repackaged, recovered a bunch of them. So it kind of thought this would be like a murder mystery, but it kind of is, but it kind of isn't, and it's much more about a woman whose husband has just died and kind of dealing with that, and then all her and his relatives, and then some kind of weird creepy things happen where stuff is being moved around in his room and his papers are being put out and drinks are being left out, and it seems like he has come back. But it's less of a, you know, murder mystery than some of the other books, but I actually liked it a lot better. Behind the Scenes at the Museum by Kate Atkinson. Not read any of her other books. I don't really know why I picked this up. Someone must have recommended it online, because the cover is so underwhelming. It's just a door and it's really grey, and then the title is a bit confusing. I kind of understand why it has that title, but it's a little bit not really, it doesn't really pull me in, I don't think. But it is about the history of a family, and it moves back and forward through the different generations. So Ruby Lennox is the kind of main protagonist throughout the book, and it starts from when she's conceived, but it does move like forward through her life, but also goes back to like her mother's childhood and her mother's childhood and so on. And there's a lot of stuff about the women in the family, because it just kind of follow the women through the family, their relationships, their marriages, which were mostly not particularly happy. And I don't know, I just thought it was quite interesting. Maggie O'Farrell, After You'd Gone, liked this book, not as much as The Hand That First Held Mine, which is the other Maggie O'Farrell book that I've read, and I need to read more of her books because they're both really good. I think this was her debut, I think. So this one is a few years old now. 2000. I think it's her debut, and it's a woman whose husband dies, and then how she's coping with that, but it also is, again, is going back and forwards in her life and her mother and her grandmother's life. Yeah, there's themes here I'm picking up. Susannah Clarke, Piranesi. It's a short book, but it's a very interesting and different book about a man called Piranesi, who lives in a house, and he hasn't really got any memory of before living in that house, but the house is absolutely massive, with like hundreds or even thousands of rooms or chambers filled with statues, and he is going out and exploring that world, but he doesn't conceive of a world outside the house. And then as you read through the book, you learn more about how he got there and what actually happened. This is one I read near the beginning of the year, Brown Girls. Dream Girls is a musical that I enjoyed, but this is Brown Girls by Daphne, Palasi, Andreades. Sorry, I cannot fathom that name, and it's me, I'm sorry. But this is a really interesting book. It doesn't have a traditional narrative structure, but it follows like a group of brown girls, so women of colour, but like they're children at the beginning, so girls, growing up in New York, and then it kind of follows them throughout their lives, and so like relationships, school, work, families, and so on, but it isn't following specific characters, and it doesn't stick with the same group. It kind of treats, in an interesting way, brown girls as they're like a sort of homogenous group, although it also criticises the fact that that's how they're treated. It's just quite an interesting way of doing it, and I recommend. Dreamtime by Venetia Welby. So firstly, I love the cover, and that's mainly why I bought it. I couldn't actually even properly read the title when I first picked it up, but it is called Dreamtime. A couple of friends travel from America to Japan just before there's going to be like a worldwide ban on aviation. So this is set about maybe 20 years in the future, I'm not sure. And so they're getting like the last flights out there, and then they have a very short amount of time to try and track down her estranged father and to reconnect with him. She has just got out of rehab. They both grew up in a very disturbing, abusive sounding cult. So you kind of, again, flash back to that and then forwards, and then they end up in Japan where they're not entirely welcome as Americans because of the American military bases that are there, that, you know, they learn more about how the Americans stationed there have behaved and the abuses that they have committed. It does get quite like dark and horrible, and at the end you're just like, how on earth did you get here? Because they just get, she's making increasingly, or throughout the whole book, seems to make quite dangerous choices, and he is desperately kind of trying to keep her safe. They end up getting separated, and she ends up being in a very like dangerous situation that she's trying to escape from, and it's also not totally clear if everything is like real and everything is actually happening. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I would say it's like a little bit downbeat. So this is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, and it's like an interesting look at someone who is sort of addicted to the internet, or the portal, which is really Twitter, I guess. But it's also like quite a social commentary on America at the time, like a couple of years ago. And then it's all done in like a series of kind of vignettes, as opposed to like, again, a straightforward narrative structure. But then part way through the book, the main character receives some like personal, or their family receives some like personal news, and there's like a personal family tragedy, I suppose. And so the second half of the book has like a different tone, and it's quite sad actually. I was surprised when I had started the book that I actually had like an emotional response to it in the second half. But yeah, it's quite a good book, like look at like sort of social media and its impact on our lives and ourselves. And then lastly, The Gardens of Evening Mists by Twan. And this is a book about a woman who returns to Malaya, now called Malaysia, who is a retired judge who was put in a Japanese prisoner of war camp several decades ago, and her sister also was there, but her sister died in the camp. And then when she escapes the camp and she is free again, she wants to create a Japanese garden in memory of her sister. So she is introduced or meets a Japanese gardener, and then they have a relationship. And then again, several decades later, she becomes a judge, and then several decades later, when she's retiring and she's having problems with her memory, she decides to write down like the story of her life. And so that's why she's now looking back at what happened to her in the prisoner of war camp, and also her relationship with this Japanese gardener. It's interesting because it was about an area of the world that I don't really know very much about, and events that happened there that were obviously hugely impactful on the countries and also the individual people that I just never learnt about and just don't know very much about. And also in so many different ways it shows what a terrible impact war has on individual people, regardless of what side of the conflict they're on. And I know that's not necessarily always the case, but in the book I think it does quite a good job of just basically, you know, war is not a good thing. I guess would be a bit of a theme perhaps, but it's not like a heavy-handed theme. It's you know, more about her personal story. Anyway, this has taken much longer than it should have done to film, and like I had to change a memory card and change the battery, But we're finally done. Those were the books I read this year, and some of my favourites and some of the ones I didn't like as much. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you've got any book suggestions, please let me know. Give me a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you in 2024 for more books.